There's a truth that many people spend years avoiding because it forces them to confront one uncomfortable question. What do I believe I deserve? Not what I say I deserve when people are watching. Not what I post on social media. Not what I tell my friends after another disappointing relationship. I'm talking about what I truly believe in those quiet moments when nobody is around. Because your standards will never rise above your self-worth. The life you accept is almost always a reflection of the value you place on yourself. A woman who understands her worth carries herself differently. You can see it before she ever speaks. It isn't arrogance. It isn't loud confidence. It isn't about proving she's better than anyone else. It's a quiet certainty that says, I know who I am, and I know what I will and will not accept. That kind of confidence cannot be borrowed from compliments, relationships, or success. It has to be built from within. One of the greatest mistakes people make is confusing attention with value. Attention is easy to get. People will admire your appearance, your personality, your achievements, or even your kindness. But attention is temporary. Value is different. Value is what remains when the applause stops. It is rooted in character, integrity, discipline, and self-respect. When you mistake attention for value, you become dependent on other people's opinions. And the moment someone withdraws their approval, your confidence begins to disappear. That's why self-worth is such a powerful foundation. It isn't built on circumstances that can change overnight. It isn't built on whether someone chooses you. It isn't built on whether a relationship survives. It isn't even built on success, because success comes and goes. Real self-worth comes from knowing that your identity is bigger than your current situation. It comes from recognizing that your value doesn't increase when someone loves you, and it doesn't decrease when someone leaves you. Psychologists often talk about something called self-concept, the collection of beliefs people hold about themselves. What's fascinating is that our decisions tend to reinforce that self-concept. If someone secretly believes they aren't worthy of respect, they'll often tolerate disrespect because it feels familiar. If they believe they aren't enough, they'll constantly seek validation from people who never intended to give it. The mind has an incredible tendency to protect what it believes, even when those beliefs are harmful. That's why changing your life doesn't begin with changing your circumstances. It begins with changing your identity. Before you ask someone else to respect you, you have to ask yourself whether you've been respecting yourself. Before you demand honesty, loyalty, or commitment from someone else, you have to become honest about what you've been allowing into your life. Every boundary you fail to establish teaches people how to treat you. Think about that for a moment. People learn your standards by watching what you tolerate. If disrespect never has consequences, disrespect becomes normal. If broken promises are always forgiven without accountability, broken promises become expected. If someone repeatedly crosses your boundaries and nothing changes, they haven't misunderstood your limits. They've understood that your limits aren't real. That's why self-worth isn't simply a feeling. It's a decision demonstrated through action. It's choosing peace over chaos. It's choosing dignity over desperation. It's choosing patience over settling. Those choices aren't always easy because they often require temporary loneliness. And loneliness scares many people more than unhappiness. But here's the irony. The fear of being alone often traps people in relationships where they already feel alone. They stay because leaving seems frightening, even though staying is slowly diminishing their confidence, their joy, and their sense of identity. Over time, they begin shrinking themselves just to preserve a connection that no longer serves them. They become quieter. They ask for less. They expect less. Eventually, they forget what they originally wanted. This is where philosophy offers an important lesson. The ancient Stoics believed that peace comes from mastering yourself rather than controlling other people. You cannot control someone's honesty. You cannot control their loyalty. You cannot force another person to recognize your worth. The only thing you truly control is your response. That response becomes the greatest expression of your self-respect. Imagine walking into every relationship, not asking, will this person choose me? But asking, does this relationship honor the person I have become? That's a completely different mindset. One is rooted in fear of rejection. The other is rooted in clarity. Fear makes you chase. Clarity makes you evaluate. Fear ignores warning signs. Clarity pays attention to actions instead of excuses. And let's be honest, most people reveal who they are much earlier than we admit. We simply hope they'll change because we like the potential we see in them. But potential has broken more hearts than reality ever could. You cannot build a healthy future based on who someone might become. You have to build it based on who they consistently show themselves to be today. The strongest people aren't those who never experience heartbreak. They're the ones who refuse to let heartbreak redefine their value. They understand that rejection isn't always a reflection of inadequacy. Sometimes it's simply redirection. Sometimes losing the wrong person protects you from losing yourself. And preserving your identity is always more valuable than preserving a relationship built on compromise without respect. This kind of confidence takes work. It requires healing old wounds, challenging limiting beliefs, and learning to enjoy your own company. It means becoming emotionally independent enough that love becomes a choice instead of a necessity. When you're comfortable standing on your own, you stop making decisions from desperation. You stop negotiating your principles for temporary comfort. You begin choosing people because they add to your life, not because they complete it. That shift changes everything. The energy you bring into every conversation changes. The standards you set become clearer. Your decisions become calmer because they're no longer driven by fear. And perhaps most importantly, you stop chasing validation because you've already found something far more valuable: self-respect. Once self-respect becomes your foundation, you no longer have to convince people to see your worth. The right people will recognize it naturally, and the wrong people will expose themselves quickly. Either outcome works in your favor because your value is no longer determined by someone else's opinion. Never forget this. The moment you truly know your worth, you stop asking for permission to be treated with respect. And that is the moment your life begins to change. Once you truly understand your worth, something remarkable begins to happen. Your perspective shifts. You stop asking, how do I make this relationship work at any cost? And start asking, is this relationship worthy of the life I'm trying to build? That single change in thinking transforms every decision you make. Because knowing your value means very little if you don't have the courage to protect it. Self-worth is the foundation, but boundaries are the structure built upon it. And one of the strongest boundaries anyone can possess is the willingness to walk away from what consistently damages their peace. Walking away is often misunderstood. People assume it is an emotional reaction, an act of anger, or a sign of giving up. In reality, walking away is usually the opposite. It is not about losing control. It is about finally taking control. It is the moment you stop trying to manage another person's behavior and begin managing your own standards. You are no longer negotiating your dignity in exchange for temporary comfort. Many people stay in unhealthy situations because they confuse endurance with strength. They believe that if they just love harder, sacrifice more, or become more patient, things will eventually improve. Persistence is admirable when you're pursuing a meaningful goal. But persistence becomes self-destruction when you're constantly investing in someone who repeatedly refuses to invest back. There is a profound difference between commitment and captivity. Psychology tells us that human beings are naturally resistant to loss. Behavioral economists describe this as loss aversion, the tendency to fear losing something more intensely than we appreciate gaining something of equal value. This explains why people remain in unhealthy relationships long after they recognize the warning signs. They're not staying because they're happy. They're staying because they're afraid of what they'll lose if they leave. Familiar pain often feels safer than unfamiliar freedom. Think about how powerful that idea is. Sometimes the greatest obstacle to a better future isn't the problem itself. It's our attachment to what we've already invested. We think, I've spent years in this relationship. I can't walk away now. But time invested is not a reason to keep making the same mistake. If anything, it's a reason to stop wasting even more of your future. The philosopher Seneca once observed that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. We imagine that walking away will destroy us. We imagine unbearable loneliness. We imagine regret. We imagine failure. Yet when people finally make the difficult decision to leave an unhealthy environment, many discover something unexpected. The peace they feared losing was the very thing they had been missing all along. Disrespect rarely arrives all at once. It begins with small compromises, a dismissed feeling here, a broken promise there, a conversation avoided, an apology without change. Over time, these moments accumulate until they become the culture of the relationship. And because the changes happen gradually, people adapt. They normalize what they once would have rejected. This is one of the most dangerous psychological patterns any person can experience. We become accustomed to what repeatedly surrounds us. Just as the mind adapts to kindness and consistency, it also adapts to chaos and disappointment. Eventually, the extraordinary becomes ordinary. What should have been unacceptable becomes expected. That's why boundaries matter so deeply. Boundaries are not punishments. They are expressions of self-respect. They don't exist to control another person's behavior. They exist to define what behavior you are willing to participate in. This distinction changes everything. You cannot force someone to become respectful, honest, or faithful. But you can decide that if they consistently choose not to be, you will no longer remain in an environment that requires you to abandon your own peace. Notice something important here. Walking away is not about winning an argument. It is not about proving someone wrong. It is not about revenge. The healthiest exits are often the quietest ones. They don't require dramatic speeches or endless explanations. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to continue participating in something that repeatedly harms your spirit. There's another truth people rarely discuss. Every yes you give to the wrong situation is a no to something better. Every year spent convincing someone to value you is a year not spent building a life with someone who already does. Opportunity isn't only about careers or finances. It's also about relationships, emotional health, personal growth, and inner peace. Remaining in the wrong place often prevents you from discovering the right one. Fear has a remarkable ability to disguise itself as logic. It whispers, what if nobody else comes along? What if this is the best you'll ever have? What if you're making a mistake? But fear almost never asks the opposite question. What if something far better is waiting on the other side of this decision? Growth begins the moment we stop allowing fear to write the story of our lives. One of the clearest signs of emotional maturity is recognizing that love alone is not enough. Respect matters, trust matters, consistency matters, shared values matter. You can genuinely care about someone and still acknowledge that they are not healthy for your future. Love without respect becomes dependence. Love without honesty becomes confusion. Love without accountability becomes permission for repeated harm. Walking away is also an act of hope. It is hope that your future deserves better than your present circumstances. It is hope that healing is possible. It is hope that peace is worth protecting. It is hope that your identity should never be sacrificed simply to maintain a relationship. And here's something worth remembering. People often don't recognize the value of healthy boundaries until they encounter someone who actually enforces them. Your willingness to leave unhealthy situations teaches others how you expect to be treated. More importantly, it teaches yourself that your own well-being matters. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. Walking away often hurts. It may involve grief, uncertainty, and moments of doubt. Strength should never be confused with the absence of pain. True strength is making the right decision despite the pain. Courage is not feeling fearless. Courage is refusing to let fear become your master. As you move through life, remember that every decision shapes your identity. Every time you choose peace over chaos, respect over excuses, and truth over comfortable illusion, you reinforce the person you are becoming. That is how confidence grows. Not through words, but through repeated acts of self-respect. The greatest freedom you will ever experience is realizing that protecting your peace is never something you have to apologize for. The moment you are willing to walk away from what diminishes you is the moment you begin walking toward the life you truly deserve. After you learn your worth and develop the courage to walk away from what no longer honors it, the next step is what truly secures your freedom. Independence. This is where everything comes together. Because knowing your value is powerful and protecting your peace is essential. But neither can be sustained if your entire life depends on someone else's choices. The greatest strength any person can develop is the ability to stand on their own feet, not because they reject love or partnership, but because they refuse to let their identity be held hostage by another person's decisions. Independence is often misunderstood. Some people hear the word and immediately think it means isolation, emotional distance, or refusing to rely on anyone. That isn't independence. Human beings are designed for connection. We thrive through meaningful relationships, trust, and mutual support. Real independence isn't about pushing people away. It's about making sure that your happiness, purpose, and sense of self are not entirely dependent on someone else's presence. There's a profound psychological difference between attachment and dependence. Healthy attachment says, I love having you in my life. Dependence says, I cannot function without you. One creates partnership, the other creates imbalance. When your emotional stability rests entirely in another person's hands, you unknowingly surrender your freedom. Every mood they have becomes your mood. Every decision they make determines your peace. Every uncertainty they create becomes your anxiety. That is not love. That is emotional captivity. The healthiest relationships are built between two complete individuals, not two people desperately trying to fill each other's emptiness. When both people have their own identity, purpose, and direction, they come together by choice rather than necessity. That changes the entire dynamic. Instead of asking, how do I keep this person from leaving? They begin asking, how can we continue growing together? Fear no longer becomes the foundation. Mutual respect does. One of the greatest gifts independence provides is clarity. Fear has a way of distorting judgment. When you're terrified of losing someone because your entire future seems tied to them, you'll ignore behaviors you would otherwise recognize as unhealthy. You'll rationalize inconsistency. You'll excuse disrespect. You'll mistake temporary affection for lasting commitment. But when you know you can survive, with or without the relationship, you begin seeing people as they truly are, rather than as you hope they will become. This is why financial independence, emotional independence, and intellectual independence all matter. They are different forms of the same principle, creating options. Options create freedom. Freedom creates confidence. And confidence allows you to make decisions based on wisdom rather than desperation. Think about financial independence for a moment. Money alone does not create happiness, but the ability to support yourself creates choices. It allows you to leave situations that compromise your dignity. It reduces the pressure to remain somewhere simply because you fear the consequences of starting over. Financial security doesn't guarantee fulfillment, but it removes barriers that often trap people in unhealthy circumstances. Emotional independence is equally important. It means learning how to regulate your emotions without constantly depending on external reassurance. It means understanding that loneliness is a temporary feeling, not a permanent identity. It means recognizing that your value doesn't fluctuate every time someone sends or doesn't send a text message. Emotional independence allows you to experience love without becoming consumed by insecurity. Intellectual independence may be the least discussed, yet it is just as essential. It is the ability to think critically, question assumptions, and make decisions based on your own principles rather than social pressure. Too many people shape their lives according to expectations they never chose. They stay in relationships because others tell them they should. They settle because they're afraid of being judged. They sacrifice dreams because someone convinced them stability mattered more than fulfillment. Independent thinking allows you to define success on your own terms. Philosophers throughout history have emphasized the importance of self-mastery. They understood that true freedom begins within. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about focusing on what is within our control rather than becoming consumed by external events. His wisdom remains relevant today. You cannot control whether someone appreciates your value. You cannot control another person's character. You cannot force loyalty, honesty, or maturity. But you can control the standards you live by, the habits you cultivate, and the direction you choose. That realization is deeply liberating. Many people spend years trying to change someone else while neglecting the one person they actually have the power to transform, themselves. They invest enormous emotional energy into convincing another person to become more responsible, more committed, or more respectful. Imagine redirecting that same energy toward your own growth. Imagine spending those hours learning new skills, strengthening your confidence, improving your health, deepening your faith, expanding your knowledge, or pursuing a purpose that gives your life meaning beyond any single relationship. When you build yourself, something extraordinary happens. Your relationships stop being the center of your identity and become one meaningful part of a much larger, richer life. You no longer define yourself by your relationship status. You define yourself by your character, your contribution, and your purpose. Purpose is one of the strongest forms of independence a person can possess. A meaningful mission creates stability even during seasons of uncertainty. When your life has direction, rejection doesn't destroy you because your future isn't dependent on one person's approval. Disappointment still hurts, but it no longer has the power to derail your entire identity. This doesn't mean you'll never experience heartbreak or moments of doubt. Independence doesn't eliminate pain. It changes your relationship with pain. Instead of viewing setbacks as evidence that you're not enough, you begin seeing them as opportunities for growth. You understand that every challenge develops resilience, every disappointment teaches discernment, and every ending prepares you for a wiser beginning. There is also a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have choices. People who have choices negotiate differently. They love differently. They communicate differently. They don't cling because they aren't operating from scarcity. They give freely because they know they are already whole. Ironically, this kind of confidence often creates healthier relationships because it removes the pressure that fear places on love. The goal is never to become someone who proudly declares, "I don't need anyone." That mindset often hides unresolved wounds behind a mask of strength. The healthier perspective is far more balanced. I welcome meaningful relationships, but I will never abandon myself to keep one. That is maturity. That is wisdom. That is freedom. As you continue your journey, remember that independence is not the destination. It is the foundation upon which lasting relationships are built. It allows you to choose with clarity instead of panic, to love with generosity instead of fear, and to walk through life with quiet confidence instead of constant uncertainty. When you know your worth, protect your peace, and build a life that stands firmly on its own foundation, you become impossible to control through fear. And that is the greatest form of freedom anyone can ever achieve. So build a life that doesn't require you to betray yourself to keep it. Because the strongest person in any room is not the one who needs the least love. It is the one who can receive love without ever surrendering their self-respect.